I'd like to welcome back to the podium Rear Admiral Jim Simons, who's getting a workout today, to introduce our honored featured speaker. Admiral?
Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of the Navy, Admiral Gary Roughead.
Well, Jim, thank you for that wonderfully brief introduction, exactly the way I like it to be. But moreover, thank you for your leadership and all that you have done in the Northwest and the way that you have taken care of our young Navy men and women who are here and how you've interacted with the community. I can lay claim to the fact that I have visited this area more than any other fleet concentration area since I became CNO. I think the commanders in the Pacific are wondering if they've done something wrong that brings me out this way every time, or maybe those that are looking for upward mobility are hoping that I'm looking for a retirement home up in this area, one of the two. But it is great to be here. I can also say that every time I have come to Seattle, the weather has been absolutely spectacular, but I think I may have overdone it a little bit this time. For Gary Borg, I'd like to congratulate you on your assignment, but obviously the Commandant of the Coast Guard didn't get the word to you about some reorganization that we were going to be doing here. So, since becoming the Chief of Naval Operations 2 years ago, it has been my pleasure, my continued pleasure, to be able to get out and about and travel around the world and spend some time visiting our young sailors, some of whom you saw today in our color guard and who we recognized as Sailors of the Year. They remain, and they always have been, my inspiration. And they never leave me short on things to be able to talk about because they are who I like to talk about the most. Because the young men and women who wear this uniform are the United States Navy. It's not the ships you'll see on parade. It is the young men and women who wear the white and the blue of the United States Navy. Every day they are out and about carrying out the 6 capabilities that a couple of years ago we articulated as our maritime strategy. And that's to be a global Navy, to be out and about, to be a Navy that has the capability and the capacity and the power to be a deterrent force, to deter those who would wish us ill, to be able to control the seas wherever and whenever that may be necessary, to be able to project power, and that power projection can come off of the decks of our nuclear aircraft carriers. It can come out of the submarines and destroyers and cruisers that we have with long-range guided missiles. It can also be projected by United States Marines who operate out of and off of our amphibious ships. But we've also added a couple of other areas in the last 2 years. One is the area of maritime security, to be able to provide for the free flow and the safe flow of commerce and the transport of goods that are so important to our prosperity and the prosperity of countries around the world. And also, as sailors have done from the beginning of time, to respond to disasters. But in our strategy, we changed it a little bit, and we have gone to a more proactive approach of humanitarian assistance that I'll touch on a little bit later. Every day, our young men and women are working with international navies, forming partnerships and relationships that are as important in preventing war as they are in winning war. And daily, they are out and about, deployed. As we sit here today in beautiful, sunny Seattle, 62,000 United States sailors are deployed around the world. And about 41% of our fleet is also deployed. That is a pretty busy pace. for any Navy to include ours. More sailors are deployed on the ground in the Middle East than there are at sea. There are 14,000 U.S. Navy sailors serving on the ground in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in the Horn of Africa. You don't hear much about them, but they are absolutely key to the success that we're realizing there. 14,000 on the ground and only 10,000 at sea. So our contributions are even greater ashore than they are at sea. And they're in the form of SEALs, so well represented here today. The men and women of construction battalions that are building everything from forward operating bases in the mountains of Afghanistan to schools and clinics to building roads and community centers. They're sailors who are deployed individually around the world. We no longer only deploy as ships or squadrons or submarines, but we deploy sailors individually, which has caused us to change our way of training, caused us to change the way of supporting the families of those sailors who go off individually. Since 9/11, the United States Navy has deployed 72,000 sailors individually into the war zone. And I would like to add that 52,000 of them have been from our reserve component. So we are indeed one Navy, active and reserve, all focused on a common mission to bring peace, security, and stability to the world. 3 of our aircraft carriers are on deployment, one in Europe, one in the Pacific, and one in the Central Command area of operations, and one more will deploy this week. 80% of all of the strike missions that were flown in the opening days of Operation Enduring Freedom, the first days after 9/11 when we went into Afghanistan, 80% of the fixed-wing aviation that flew in support primarily of our SEALs and Special Forces came off of our aircraft carriers. During the major combat phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom, 65% of the fixed-wing sorties came off of United States aircraft carriers. We have cruisers and destroyers operating in the Gulf of Aden, which is right off the coast of Somalia, in counter-piracy operations. They are patrolling an area 4 times the size of Texas. It's easy to look at a map and see a little bit of an ocean patch, but it's 4 times the size of Texas, and they're making a difference. We have cruisers and destroyers that are providing ballistic missile defense in the Western Pacific, in the Arabian Gulf, and in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have also deployed our hospital ships, Comfort and Mercy. In fact, the hospital ship Comfort is on its way back from a 4.5-month mission into South America. In the past 4 years since we began our proactive humanitarian assistance from our Navy ships, we have treated 409,000 patients from our ships. That is a lot of people. It's like packing Quest Stadium and treating everyone in there 6 times. It'd probably be the loudest waiting room that you've ever had, but that's what our people are doing. You know, we're kind of an everything force. And an example of that is being able to take a ship like the USS Bainbridge, one of our Aegis destroyers. It was the USS Bainbridge that was the platform that the SEALs used to rescue Captain Phillips of the Maersk, Alabama. It was an Aegis cruiser or destroyer similar to the Bainbridge that was conducting an Africa partnership station on the east coast and on the west coast of Africa. And it was an Aegis destroyer that was the first ship to take humanitarian assistance and relief supplies into Georgia after the conflict with Russia last year. And all of these ships and forces and sailors are working with partner nations, much as we have just done with an operation that we call Africa Partnership Station, where we took one of our amphibious ships and put it off the coast of West Africa for 5 months, and it worked with the navies and the nations and the non-governmental organizations there to bring some structure and support to those nations, navies, and militaries and interagencies that are trying to improve maritime security in that area. But what does all this really mean? I think it means that you have a Navy that is able to be everywhere, but in a way, nowhere. And I think that is something that is very, very important, because we can have that type of capability, whether it's the hospital ship, or whether it's the Aegis destroyer, or whether it's the ship like Bainbridge that rescued Captain Phillips. And we don't have to ask anyone for permission to be there, because we operate in the international domain. So we can be everywhere, but not have to ask anyone to be there. And I think that that is especially important today. I believe it will become even more important in the future as issues of sovereignty become more sensitive to nations and will become of greater concern to nations. And the world is going to continue to move extraordinarily quickly, and the Navy is the force that can move in with that same speed. I'm often congratulated, not me personally, but the Navy, for the response that we provided following the tsunami of 2004 in Southeast Asia. And the conversation will normally highlight the fact that we were there so quickly. And they will normally say, well, your sailors must be very good. And that is indeed a fact. They are good, and we do come out of the blocks quickly. But we can respond to events like that because we are there. We are always there. On every continent, in every ocean, the United States Navy is present. They are trained. They are ready to move, ready to step in with whatever may be required. And I particularly appreciate the opportunity to share this with this group, because being from Seattle, being from the Northwest, being from the Puget Sound area, you understand the importance of the oceans. You understand the importance, of the maritime domain. And I sum it up really in three things. The maritime domain is about commerce, it's about communications, and it's about resources. It's about commerce because about 90% of all the trade that moves in the world moves on the oceans. And it's the Navy and the Coast Guard that provide for that order and that security and that stability for that trade to be able to move. And it's about communications. And communications often is portrayed, at least in the Washington circles where I operate most of the time these days, to be a PowerPoint slide with a lot of lightning bolts going up and down into space and everyone communicating. But communications really is on the bottom of the ocean in the form of the networks of cables that span the oceans around the world. 95% of the world's communications move through those cables that are on the bottom of the ocean floors. $3.2 trillion a day moves on those cables. That is going to be increasingly important in the future. And it's also about resources. And we often think about resources in the form of hydrocarbons. And if you look at the littoral area that borders the coastlines of all the continents, 65% of the known world oil reserves are in that band. 35% of all the gas reserves are in that band. And we haven't even begun to talk about wind energy and wave energy and energy derived from things such as algae. So when you think about the oceans, I believe it's important to think about commerce, communications, and resources, because we will forever be a maritime nation, and we will forever be tied to the oceans. And the importance of the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard will continue. I spend my time thinking really about three things: about the future Navy, about the Navy of today, and about people. Are we building the Navy that we need for tomorrow, so that long after those who are wearing the uniform today have passed from the scene, are the leaders of tomorrow operating a Navy that meets their needs at their time? One of the other reasons why I happen to be up here is tomorrow we're going to roll out the P-8 aircraft, the P-8 Poseidon aircraft, which is the relief of the P-3 that has flown so much in support of our interests around the world, and that is so well taken care of up at Whidbey. But the P-8 is on its way. Yesterday morning we were in Texas, where we rolled out the next strike fighter for the United States Navy, the Joint Strike Fighter, a great airplane that will serve our nation and our Navy for decades to come. We're building the Littoral Combat Ship, which is an exciting, very exciting ship. Had a little problem with number 2. We couldn't get it up to full power, but we got it to 43 knots, and I think that's a pretty good start, and we're going to continue to work on it from there. But I also think that as you who appreciate the value of the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, the importance of the oceans, I believe it's important to recognize that the Navy that we operate today, where we have 62,000 sailors deployed, 41% of our ships deployed, is the smallest Navy at 284 ships since 1916. And I would submit, ladies and gentlemen, that our global interests, our global needs, are a little bit more complex than they were in 1916. And so it is important that we continue to build that Navy to meet the needs of tomorrow, and that we build the capacity or the numbers in that Navy that allow us to support those global interests and global needs. In the form of the current readiness and what we do today, I think you can look at a paper and you can see just how well your Navy is performing. But it takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of effort. We need to ensure that we are providing the resources to be able to practice, to be able to fly, so that when our young men and women go forward, they're prepared for whatever does come their way. I'm a firm believer that the will to win is important. The will to prepare to win is even more important. And so that comes with training and investing in the opportunities to train our people. I would also say that it's important that as we prepare our folks to go forward, that we also have the conditions where they can train. And I'm very, very pleased that this year, after a little bit of a protracted process, we took a case to the Supreme Court that was keeping our young men and women from being able to train in a very complex area, anti-submarine warfare, and we were able to demonstrate the need to train, as well as the fact that we were good stewards of the environment. So it's not only the resources, but it's also being able to set the right conditions to allow our men and women to train in appropriate ways while we still continue to be good stewards of the environment. But with all of that, the most important thing that we deal with is people. As I've said, the ships, the airplanes, submarines have zero value to the nation until you put people in them. And then their value just goes off the scale, much as every business owner in this room recognizes. And there are so many examples that I see day in and day out of the value that our people bring. A little over a year ago in the Straits of Hormuz, that strait that takes you into the Arabian Gulf, some of our ships were challenged by some Iranian small boats. Our commanding officers and our sailors knew what they had to do. They had been trained what to do. They had the presence of mind and the professionalism and the patience to not overreact. And as a result of that, there was not a misstep, and we haven't had an incident like that since that time. But we're also reminded that we're a nation at war. And as I look at our SEAL brethren here, I think back in the past year of spending time with the families of two great young men, Petty Officer Michael Mansour and Lieutenant Michael Murphy, who gave their lives for their teammates, and their nation recognized them with the highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. These are great, great people, and they are representative of all that we stand for. But then there's also the softer side of the Navy. I've talked to the Humanitarian Assistance and share with you a story of the hospital ship Comfort that has just completed the mission that I mentioned. And there was a young ensign by the name of Jonathan Ackerman. He was a Navy nurse on board that ship. And he was keeping a blog up, which is not uncommon in the world of communications in which we live. And he was talking about his work as part of a team that just in Colombia alone treated 16,000 patients. And he said, quote, "One of the most humbling experiences for me has been the requests for autographs from my patients," unquote. That's the type of young person that we have going out. So we can be at the high end, but we can also turn the softer hand and help out others. We live in an interesting time. We have a great Navy with great people. It is important, I believe, that all of us continue to make every opportunity to let the young men and women of America know of the great opportunities that exist in the Navy, the opportunities for leadership at an incredibly young age, the opportunity to make a difference in the world, the opportunity to see the world. I think it's also important that we recognize that only 28% of the young men and women in the United States qualify for military service. But I think that we must go out and reach out to those who don't know us to let them know of the great opportunities that we have. But you can be assured that your Navy is on station, it is ready, it is professional, it is trained, it is ready at all times to do whatever the nation may ask. I ask also that you continue to stay in touch with your Navy. We have a great website, navy.mil, and visit it from time to time. And the stories that I shared with you happen every day, and you can continue to follow our story. We are working hard, we are busy, but we love what we do. We love serving this great nation, and we love serving the American people. And with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
We can have our mic handlers at the ready if anyone has a question for the Chief of Naval Operations.
So we are all Rotarians, and our task as an international organization is to eliminate polio in the world. And the clubs in this area have been assigned to the Horn of Africa. So many of us have been there 6, 7, 8 years in a row working on that. We see our Navy counterparts there. We see them digging wells, building schools. We're doing some of the same stuff, but we need a partnership.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out how to do that. The local Navy people are kind of afraid to talk to us because they aren't, no one's giving them orders from the top to help. But there's places where, like, where's Lori? Lori's working way down in southern Ethiopia. We can't get our stuff for schools down there. We need help. And vice versa, we think we can help you with these Rotary clubs. So I guess that's a lousy excuse for a question. But anything you could do to help us would sure be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also like to point out that Admiral Rick Hunt, several years ago, led our task force in the Horn of Africa. One of the things that we have done with respect to our humanitarian missions is it's just not all Navy, it's not all U.S. military, it's not all military. But we have reached out to non-governmental organizations. In fact, we've had some foreign NGOs, but also some of the larger U.S. ones, Project Hope. And what we did last year for the first time, this past September, was we held in Washington a Navy NGO conference to get to some of these issues that you were talking about, but we did not include the Rotary. And I think that's something that would be very helpful. And I appreciate you bringing it up, and I have some folks here who are taking on this. But I think that it is important because we don't want to be duplicative, because I think that wastes the resources. We can also bump into one another. And as we found with the NGOs, there are things that they can do that we can't. There are things we can do they can't. But when we work together, we're a pretty powerful force, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
So in the early part of the 19th century, the Navy and the Marines went to the shores of Tripoli. And they're credited for suppressing and doing away with pirates. Why are we having so much trouble in Somalia, even though its fort area is so huge, if you point it out? But we had great success a long time ago in sailing ships. Why are we having trouble now?
Well, they kind of came back at us after 200 years. And but piracy has been around for a while. There's no question that simply going after pirates on the ocean is not what it takes. I kind of refer to it as swatting flies. Pirates don't live at sea, they live ashore. The problem in Somalia is there is no rule of law, there is no governance, so consequently the money is moving, and piracy is a business. They'll take the ransom, they'll reinvest in better communications, better weapons, faster boats. There was a time where the pirates only operated a little bit offshore. Recently, they've been out as far as 600 miles. So the issue has to be one of squeezing from the sea, squeezing from the shore. That's how we rectified it in the Straits of Malacca a few years ago. But the advantage that we had there with Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand was that you had the rule of law and you could get police forces to come in and grab them on the shore. That's the problem that's missing in Somalia, and we've got to get to that dimension of it as well. Because if we don't, it's going to be just a big fly swatting exercise.
Recently, we've been reading about the changes in the Arctic, melting of ice there, and it seems to have huge implications geopolitically. And it'd be very interesting to hear your perspective on sort of in a global sense, how that's impacting planning and thinking in terms of the coming century.
Right. The importance of the Arctic is upon us. The Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Thad Allen, and myself have had several sessions, as have our staffs, working on the Arctic. I think the first thing that we're going to see is a rush to the resources, because we know there is a lot of stuff down there. We know that there will be claims with regard to those resources. While some may have differing opinions on it, I believe one of the most important things that we must do is to ratify the Convention of the Law on the Sea that puts us at the table in a way that we have not been able to be there before. I think the transportation dimension is going to take a while to play out. Sure, there's some of the old ice that's retreated, but there's still big pieces of ice that float around there. And as I talk to some of the shipping companies, they're saying not quite yet. It's going to be a while, but it will get there. I also believe it's important to work with the other countries that have interests, Canada, Norway, and to be able to move forward in that regard. One of the things that I've done a little closer to the tent was, for the first time in a long time, I've tried something rather unique. I've appointed an oceanographer to be the oceanographer of the Navy. We haven't had one of those in a while, and he is bringing a level of intellectual effort into looking at the Arctic. He also, because he has been an oceanographer for his entire career, is well plugged into the whole network that is discussing this. We are very serious about it, but I think it'll be resources first and then on to transportation after that. Over here, and then we'll go to Bill.
Admiral, I've read some exciting articles about the next generation of carriers, and I understand one of them is going to be home ported in this area. Could you forecast about when we might see that new carrier? These are the ones that the planes go off from a magnetic field instead of the steam catapults?
Right. No, we're very, very excited about that. fact, Dave Van Lett and I have talked about that carrier and that system quite a bit here in recent months. But that will be the Gerald Ford. That will have that electromagnetic launching capability. We need to get to that because it will allow us to put heavier planes into the air. I think that's going to be in our future. It also reduces manpower, which is absolutely key in being able to control costs. But Gerald Ford will be coming along in around 2015, and she will be the first electromagnetic aircraft launching system, or EMALS, configured carrier. Very important to the Navy. But it's not just EMALS. I mentioned the Joint Strike Fighter, the new carrier, the Joint Strike Fighter, that launching capability really give us a leap in capability that we haven't had before. And equally important will be our movement to unmanned aerial vehicles. We have already been moving down that road. About a month and a half ago, for the first time in history, an unmanned autonomous vehicle landed and took off from a Navy ship at night. That was one of our Fire Scout vertical takeoff UAVs. We've signed contracts for the Broad Area Maritime Surveillance System, which is a very large UAV. And if you recall from the CNN pictures of the Phillips rescue, there was a little system called Scan Eagle that was flying above the pirated ship and then being able to provide overhead to the destroyer. That was an unmanned vehicle that was landing and taking off from that destroyer. That was not a program of record. That was something that about 7 or 8 months ago we made the decision we were going to just start proliferating it, and as luck would have it, it was in the right place at the right time.
This might be the last question, so I'll throw you a hanging curveball.
Okay.
How are we doing on recruiting and retention, and what can we do to help?
Recruiting and retention is off the scale. The drivers to me are the fact that we're a great organization. We are a well-compensated force with tremendous benefits. Little example. If you went back to the period 1990 to 1995, and you took a second-class petty officer. Who's a second-class petty officer here? Anybody? They don't have one. Okay. Would you? Okay. Second-class petty officer. Between 1990 and 1995, if you looked at the pay scale, the pay went up $85. Fast forward, do a decade leapfrog to 2000, 2005. Second-class petty officer, the pay went up $11,000. That's not a bad jump. So as a result of great benefits, great compensation, and a wonderfully challenging environment and a fulfilling environment to live in, our retention is through the roof to the point where I had a payroll problem this year to the tune of $350 million. I was over payroll. Not a good position to be in, as many businessmen would know, but you have to make it, so you have to figure out how to make it. Rick Hunt was back in Washington at the time. He bailed me out, found the money, and we were able to get some help from Congress, actually, to do that. We run our recruiting year from October to October. We were done about a month ago for recruiting for this year. Retention is extraordinarily high. People are, for the first time in 38 years, we've made nuclear operating recruiting. Attrition is low because we're bringing great young men and women in. They're not attriting as much as they have been, and the SEALs, which is by everyone's definition the hardest program to get through because of some investments that we make up front in preparing young people for the rigors of that program. We're more successful on the SEAL side than we have been. So we're doing really well. But I'm also aware of the fact that everything is cyclical, and we cannot become complacent. I think it's important that we make young people aware of what we're doing. And an area that has been extremely important to me has been the area of diversity. Our Navy looks like America. Our officer corps does not. It's a lot of white men. Our senior civilian executives, a lot of white men. And we are that way because young people don't know who we are. We put a press on at the Naval Academy, increased applications by 40%, increased minority applications by 57%. So the key is to get out, to let young people know where the opportunities are, what we can do, and let them see the Navy and see the great work that can be done and a very, very fulfilling life if you choose to make the Navy your career. But please continue to go out and talk about the Navy. Not a problem. See me after lunch.
Admiral Roughead, wonderful human being, wonderful leader, great speaker. You hit it out of the park. We are so thrilled that you can be here, and on behalf of the Fleet Committee, Navy League, and Seattle Rotary, the largest and best in the world, we'd like to present a plaque thanking you for being here with us.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you so much.
You know, unless one has had the privilege of serving in our armed forces, one doesn't really understand all the sacrifices that our men and women in uniform make each and every day for our freedom, our liberty, and our daily way of life. Admiral Roughead, we are so proud to know that a leader of your caliber is in command of this country's Navy. We salute you and all the personnel with us today for your service to our country. Could I have those in uniform just stand one more time for us, please? Thanks again to all of today's program participants. Welcome, Kirk and Dan. We're anxious to see your committee choices. Next week, August 5th, we'll be at the Sheraton Hotel where we will hear from our brand new Husky football coach, Steve Sarkisian. I hear he might be selling Rose Bowl tickets at the meeting. Our main program will feature the University of Washington President Mark Emmert, who will give an update on the UW today and how they're dealing with higher education in our current economic climate. In 55 seconds, we're going to adjourn topside to watch the arrival of the fleet and take in a couple of surprises. So I think I have time for one quick story. There was a brand new sailor on guard duty at the main gate at the Bangor Navy base. His orders were clear. No car was to enter that did not have a special base decal on the windshield. Just then, a great big sedan rolled up with a rear admiral in the back seat. The sailor yelled, "Halt! Who goes there?" The petty officer driver yelled back, "Admiral David Jones." The young guard said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you through. You've got to have a base decal on your windshield." Admiral Jones heard this and said, "Balderdash, drive on, petty officer." The sailor said, "Hold it, you really can't come through here. I have orders to shoot if you try driving in without a decal." Admiral Jones commanded his driver again, "I'm telling you, son, drive on." Flustered, the sailor on duty rushed over to the open rear window of the car and said, "Admiral, sir, I need your help, please. I'm new at this and I'm not sure. Do I shoot you or your driver?" See you next week. We're adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.